Okay, sorry about the delayed start. Can everyone still hear us? We are using our OWL speakers, so please just let us know if there's any issues. But it is March 24th, and we are going to start a special meeting, actually, this is our work session, which will go from 5 to 6:30, and then at 6:30, we'll have a special meeting for an executive session, and then at 7 o'clock, we will have our regular meeting, so wanted to lay that all out for everyone. I want to give you a little background before we start on special districts and why we are having this discussion tonight. And let me find my notes real quick. So before I hand over the reins to Joe with DOLA to go over special improvement districts and business improvement districts, I want to remind you that we do have a petition in this packet for the board to review, and this is kind of why we're learning about this as well. So since we do have a petition in this packet, we should probably refrain from discussing the proposed project for that specific special improvement district. We can please just kind of talk in generalities, I think would be the best for that one, as you learn about these special improvement districts. But then on the other hand, we have Blair Street Association present to learn with the board. So Mike is here representing the Blair Street Association to learn with the board on the business improvement districts. So we can talk more pointed at business improvement districts for Blair Street if needed. Does that sound good? Yes. All right. Could we talk about the proposed petition? Clayton?
That's not what I think. What is
Yeah,
the agenda
okay.
was,
Just wanted to double check.
we'd have to.
Yeah. Right. So we have that scheduled at 7 o'clock.
And could I ask, it seems like we could ask general questions around special improvement districts, but not specific questions related to the petition in front of us.
Correct. Correct.
Thanks.
And then just a little bit of research I was trying to figure out. There was a West Side Improvement District proposed. I have a date and it was 2017 potentially. And then we did have an entertainment district at one point, which Blair Street was a part of in 2016. So that's a little history on that. But I will hand it over to Joe and you can share your screen to go over your presentation. And so Joe McConnell is with DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs, and Patrick Rondinelli is joining us as well to kind of help give an overview on the special improvement district.
All right. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Like you said, I'm Joe McConnell with the Division of Local Government at DOLA. Patrick Rondinelli is also with DOLA as well. He is a field manager. Today I will go over the basics of special and business improvement districts. As always, our disclaimer, we are not attorneys and this is not legal advice. Municipal Special Improvement Districts, or SIDs, are authorized by Title 31, which is a municipal title of the Colorado Revised Statutes, Article 25, which are the municipal powers of public improvements, and Part 5 governs SIDs. SIDs are not a political subdivision of the state and not considered a unique or separate from the municipality that creates them. They are primarily used to finance a one-time improvement that benefits specific properties, which in turn pay a special property assessment for that beneficial improvement. SIDs are a very common method of municipal financing. Our local government information system, or LGIS, has about 3 dozen, but I suspect there are many more out there. For example, I found a blurb from the Montrose City website that mentioned it has implemented over 40 SIDs in just the last 50 years. Within that Part 5, it says SIDs may be formed for constructing, installing, or acquiring any public improvement that a municipality is authorized to by ordinance or laws of the state. Among the improvements mentioned in Part 5 are water, sewer improvements, and storm drainage, but that's just a short list. There's many more. It doesn't sound like this is the case here, but for future reference, an SID may be formed in an unincorporated area with the county's consent. Might be useful as development grows, but the town doesn't want to annex. There is a petition process from the owners of at least 50% of the proposed area, but it sounds like they're already at that process, past that process. There's a hearing, and if everything looks right, the district is formed by a municipal ordinance. The method of funding improvements is a special property assessment. The assessments are usually charged on a uniform basis, unless some lots are shaped oddly. The projects I've reviewed for were the county version of an improvement districts, which are very similar. They usually just charged by lot the same amount. So each property owner would pay a fixed amount as a proportion of the total amortized cost, regardless of the individual property's valuation. The improvements are very likely to cost more than the property owners would be comfortable paying all at once. So these will be paid with a bond or other debt instrument. And this must be approved by district voters at a Tabor election. You'll want to remember that the principal costs and total repayment will be the maximum you'll be able to borrow from your ballot language. To be clear, be careful that the amount in the ballot language isn't too low, because if it is, you'll have to go back to the ballot, and that could delay the project financing for 6 months to a year, because a Tabor election must be held in November. I believe a Tabor election could also be possible at the time of the town's regular election in April of even years. I'll talk about eligible electors at the end. So after the election, the improvements are built. The repayment will be somewhere between 10 and 20 years usually. Because it isn't a local government's, SIDs do not have a statutory method for dissolution in statute. Neither does the county version, but the town could formally dissolve the district if it chooses to. So BIDs, business improvement districts, also found in Title 31, Article 25, which has the municipal powers of public improvements. According to our LGIS database, there are about 81 BIDs in the state, and they are mostly in larger jurisdictions, but also in smaller touristy municipalities like Central City or Steamboat Springs. Unlike SIDs, they are a quasi-municipal entity and a public subdivision of the political subdivision of the state, similar to some forms of Title 32, Article 1 special district. They're kind of like a purely commercial cousin of metropolitan districts, because BIDs can do things that are they're very versatile. But BIDs are generally more intertwined with a town's vision than a special district. BIDs have more finance options available than SIDs, but as the name implies, the district may only include commercial properties. No residential or agricultural based classified properties could be included. Thus, the source of revenue must be taxable, real or personal commercial properties, but so too the benefits. From what I understand of the business owner's goals, these all appear to be described explicitly, i.e. sidewalks, streets, street lights, and things of that nature. Similar to the SID, BID is petition initiated. Petitioners must include commercial property with at least 50% of the assessed value and acreage of the proposed district. It will contain things like boundaries, types of services, improvements, and will include 3 petition representatives and also a name. The town has a hearing 20 to 40 days after receiving a complete petition. Part of that petition may include the BID's board. There are 3 options as I understand it. One is probably the simplest, which is the town board governs the BID ex officio, or the town trustees could appoint a board of directors. The last option is for an independently elected board of directors, but be aware that if you choose this option, the BID will be subject to regular elections, which is a little weird because BID elections are conducted as if they were Title 32 Article 1 special districts. Those use a different code than statutory towns, and their elections are in May of odd years instead of April of even years. The district could start off ex officio, and if it grows to the point that they want to have a separate board, they could also just request that via petition. At the hearing I mentioned 2 slides ago, district may be established by ordinance. Now, the nice thing about BIDs is there are several finance options available. Unlike SIDs, BIDs may supervise operations of district improvements, and to that end, may charge fees. BIDs also have the ability to levy a property tax for either operations or debt. A BID can even create its own SID for special assessments. With the exception of fees and charges, special assessments, property tax, and debt would require a Tabor election. Usually a fee-based debt is Tabor exempt, but I assume that since the statute I have referenced in that final bullet seems to apply any debt, I think that would be the case, that an election would probably be best held in the November or regular election date for the town.
Sorry, Mr. McConnell, sorry to interrupt you. Just for the board to be aware, you have to. So anytime there's a mill levy or tax, it has to be a regular election. So it's got to be the biennial odd in May, or it's got to be in November. Just
because of Tabor.
for the Tabor.
Yeah.
So if that's the funding mechanism, which is the most typical for like no levy. There's fees and other things too, but just so you're aware, it has to be, there's no like wiggle room. We can't do special election to do any sort of Tabor event. I think once. Yeah, so if you change, anytime you change the tax, it's gotta be that odd May or regular election in November. Thanks, sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's a good point. I said April, and that was not correct. It would be at the regular election for the BID time, or November. Okay, so the project is bid, improvements are completed, usually with debt. Property tax is levied by property value. And as we just discussed, special assessments in a BID's special improvement district are generally assessed equally regardless of assessed value. Fee-based debt is also a possibility, or fees or charges for staggered projects could be an option, but it sounds like it's not a very large area, so financing is probably what you're after. BIDs seem to be a more permanent option than SIDs, but there is a dissolution procedure if the town and district want to discard their BID at some point in the future. Last thing I'll mention is an eligible elector may vary from who may sign a petition. Obviously, to be an eligible elector, a person has to be within the boundaries of the district. That's one option, or one way of qualifying. The boundaries of either SIDs or BIDs do not have to be contiguous, meaning they don't have to touch, which makes sense for BIDs especially because they only allow commercial properties. Eligible electors are registered to vote in Colorado and are residents. Unlike statutory towns, non-resident property owners or their spouse or civil union partners who are registered to vote in Colorado may also vote. For non-persons, that would be LLCs, trusts, partnerships, etc., there is provision to appoint one natural person to vote as long as that information is filed with the muni clerk or district secretary. I assume the clerk would be The secretary of the BID is governed ex officio. Many business properties are not owned, are owned, not owned in a natural person's name for liability purposes or in an LLC or trust or partnership. That's why they have that C there. And the election would be for the people in the boundaries, as I mentioned, not for the entire town. That's about all I have. I think my contact information was what I sent in your packets. Any questions?
Thanks, Joe, for that. This is Dana. I had a couple of questions, but I'll open it up to my colleagues to start first if there's anything. That was a lot of information that was really helpful. Improvement districts have been something kind of on my mind for a while, so I appreciate you bringing this because I think for a municipality like ours, it provides options for those who benefit the most directly to kind of come together, right? There's no big swath of land that a developer owns necessarily that they can put the infrastructure in, and it's all these little individual businesses or landowners. And so I think they're an interesting option for folks who want to make something happen. So yeah, I have a variety of questions, but I'll open it up to my colleagues first.
Thank you. I have a question. So for the initial payment, would that be the burden on the town and then the property owners would eventually pay them back? Would we be paying upfront for the full project at first, or how would that work?
There would be a bond or some sort of debt mechanism, and the repayment would be, if we're talking about an SID, would be the special property assessments. Usually they're amortized, so each property would pay, X amount each year from the assessor role, as far as I understand it.
Is it fair to say, Joe, or to clarify that it's kind of like the reason why this works in this way is because the municipality can use our borrowing power. We have more borrowing power than like a random group of property owners or business owners do. So there's a loan, but the obligation of that loan, the repayment of that loan is not done by the town. It's done by the either business owners or the property owners who are directly benefiting. So I think that as I've started to think about that, that's become more apparent to me is we're using our borrowing power as a municipality, but the obligation for repayment is on and kind of we control sort of the process of how that happens in conjunction with the assessor, but the actual obligation of repayment is on the businesses that are part of the business improvement district or the landowners that are part of the special improvement district.
Yeah, that's the benefit of improvement districts and even special districts is they're paying their own way.
Then I have a question on governance, because it seems like for both the special improvement, it's like that there needs to be not just an election, but like a maintenance of that board. Have those typically, like, do they meet regularly, or do they have some sort of like obligation to each other, or like, do they have to have elections every year? What does the follow-up, because I'm assuming to pay off these bonds is many years in the process, so like, how does the governance go of all of these different entities?
The governance for the SIDs is minimal. It's collection of the assessment, the debt's paid. There really isn't a board. I guess you could say it's ex officio, but there's minimal input from the board once everything's set up. For the LID, for the BID, it really depends on how it's set up, whether they're charging fees. If it's just a matter of collecting a property tax and repaying a debt, that's really easy. It's, we paid our debt service this year, and there's not too much else to it, but if they're collecting fees, then they'd probably have to meet more often.
And then, sorry, and then sort of the question I had on that was, there's like, we kind of get a petition, we see it as a town board, and then there's sort of the formation of that SID or, BID. And in that time, do we like come to an agreement on how, like, we know if they're doing a fee or a tax, like, that we would be able to figure that out in that discussion, like in that time period between when they submit a petition and the 40 days, or when does that happen? I guess there's two questions there. Does that happen? And if it does, when does it happen?
I'd have to look at the statute specifically if it mentioned a financial plan. It could start off collecting fees. Doesn't sound like that's what they want to do in this case, but I don't know.
Yeah, just an example.
Right. Improvement districts in general, sometimes a general improvement district will collect fees only, and some of them collect taxes only and fees. They can be as complicated as a special district, but without all the administrative rigmarole that a Title 32 Article 1 special district would have. So it just depends on what they plan to do. It would be good if they know exactly how they want to approach the improvements ahead of time.
Yeah.
Joe, well, Lindsay, maybe to clarify with that, is what you're saying, Joe, that would typically be outlined in the petition or not necessarily?
I'd have to look at the statute a little closer.
Yeah.
But
Well, just, I'm thinking like we're a small community, you know, making sure it works for like all parts of the community as we're all learning together. And so just as we walk through the process, like at what point is there back and forth ability there? I don't know if that makes sense. Right.
well, I think it would depend on in a lot of ways, the structure of the board. Is it ex officio? Is it appointed? Is it separately elected?
Okay.
So, and then it's okay to talk generally about what we're looking at. We're talking about the SID petition.
I was talking about like the business improvement,
Oh, the business.
just like, I don't know, we're all learning how to do this and we want to make sure it works for everyone and.
Yeah, just keep in mind when we talk about these things. It's all under the same statute, but it's wildly complicated and it's different for everything. So BID is different than GID is different than SID is different than Metropolitan District is different than Urban Renewable Authority. They all have different, like, it's a massive, imagine the most complicated Venn diagram possible where some things apply to all of it and then they all have their own individual things. So it's really important when we talk about it, make sure, because I want to make sure we get the right answer to you.
Okay, I
So
think
like
maybe
bids,
yeah.
bids is way different than SIDS.
Yeah, maybe that helps answer the question of just like it's really complicated how they all function, and so baking in time into whatever proposal we get for that. Like ability to like almost like not workshop it, but just understand what we're all agreeing to.
Yeah, so like bids would be are very flexible.
Okay.
Like the board can be whoever is at the election originally, if it's gonna be done through like a mill levy, typically at that election. Before it, gets ordered by the, that goes to district court too, but. It could be anybody, and typically you want people on the board who are part of that business district, right? And then if you wanna like jump to SID or GID is ex officio. SID is town council, which is in our case BOT, because we're not home rule, so. If you're, you have to do a lot of jumping around.
Totally. No, that's okay.
Yeah, but that's a great question. Bids is really interesting because it's very flexible.
And special, SIDs are not as flexible.
Well, it depends on what we're talking about.
Oh, man.
If we're talking about, if you're talking about boards, then no. The
Okay,
SID
just
is,
boards.
SID by statute is board of trustees. Like, it says city council in the code, I think, or sorry, the code, I think it says specifically city council in the statute. I have to go far on that. But they mean like the BOT, like,
Mhm.
you are the board if you set up an SID. It's like, but you're not, it's not its own separate entity either. It's not its own, it's not like setting up like a separate, like, you know how you guys act ex officio as, board and what we just said, why am I blanking?
Silverton Housing Authority.
Housing authority, it's not considered its own entity, so it's completely different world. So you're a board, but you're literally like a sub board to your like selves, I guess, but it's more like a quasi
Mhm.
private entity. I don't know how to say it's just strange.
And so then for the SID, it would be a lot, like there'd be additional burden on staff then, like would we need additional capacity for setting up the SID? Maybe it's a bigger question, I'm just, if we're responsible for it,
Yeah, if we're funding, it, especially.
yeah.
I have like a really specific question about the BID, not what's happening later on tonight. But you were saying that it's specifically for commercial properties. So in Silverton, we have Blair Street, we have a lot of businesses, restaurants, and a few residential homes along there. I am just wondering if we end up doing a bid for parts of Blair Street and a business wanted to create a sidewalk or do improvements on a sidewalk, if a residential house is next to it, could they still benefit from that? Or is it strictly within the property lines of the commercial business? Any improvement? Or is
That's a
that
good question. Yeah, only commercial properties would pay
okay?
for that. So I think it would be up to the commercial district, I suppose, but whether they wanted it to go up the entire street, it's a good question.
So what I
don't
hear
have
you
the answer.
saying, Joe, is like, let's say the scope of the project, the intent of a project is to have a connected sidewalk. But on parts of that sidewalk, there are some residential properties that face that sidewalk. The residential properties could not be included as part of the payers in the business improvement district. But the business improvement district itself could say, we want this whole project to be completed and funded in the entirety. But then it would turn into a case where the commercial owners that are part of the bid would be shouldering that cost for the entirety of the project.
Yeah, and I don't know. I can't say that we are able to do that in areas outside the district boundaries.
But if the district included residential, it's mixed. It's a mixed, in this kinds of discussion, it would be a mixed district that has some of both.
Well,
I mean, go ahead.
structurally, Mayor Cranker, you don't have a mixed use. How do I put this? You can't have like a mixed use special district, but you can have a subcomponent, like a bid can have a SID as a component, but they're not like mixed use, like they don't all go together in their same thing. So you have to stand up a bid and the bid can stand up a SID. So business districts can have SIDs within a business district, but that doesn't make it, it's not like mixed use where it all kind of plays different. They're considered different because for the most part, the bid is kind of like that quasi municipal Whereas the SID is completely its own, is not considered quasi municipal at all. It's like I said, like it's. Even as I say the words, I mean, it's not even that simple.
I have a question maybe about understanding that difference, like. So business improvement district might undertake many projects, some of them might be ongoing. Would a special improvement district that, you know, maybe let's say a SID is formed to do one specific thing. Would that same special improvement district then be able to do future projects, or is a new one formed for each kind of, you know, batch of debt and project that happens?
My own experience has only been with one-time projects. Like I said, they can't fund maintenance. So this is your project, you're funding it once. It's just a financing mechanism. I assume you would set up a different district for a different special improvement. But that's, I'm not not an attorney, so.
Yeah.
I've only, you know, I've been involved with the county version of which are local improvement districts, not to confuse everyone with all these improvement districts. But they've just been, you know, here's your sewer interceptor that people can tap into. This is kind of what this is for is, oh, you need water lines, sewer lines, and now you can connect for a very simple project without setting up a very complicated type of local government, which is which would be a water district or something. This is the SID is just for here's a project that we need to have done so that these resident utilities, basically.
So-
Business improvement districts is usually a good place to look would be the definitions of the business improvement district, which describes the improvements that are eligible. And like I mentioned, streets, sidewalks, curb, gutters, pedestrian malls, street lights. But I don't know the answer to the residential portion. But like he was mentioning, the SID is an option for BIDs to create.
They do that so they can assess. SIDs can do assessments. Whereas a BID, I think, has to go through Tabor to do everything. So sometimes it benefits them to do an SID with a BID. But they're stovepiped within, they're not like mixed.
And in that case, then the board of the SID is the board of the BID, that no. Or it's still a temple and municipal.
The BID still is flexible.
Yeah.
So the BID could be local business people, or it could be the town. That happens at the time of the election if you're using mill levy. SID is a little different because it's set by statute and there's only assessments to work out. So they would like, it could be the same or it could be different. The bid could be, you know, one ex officio member and then a bunch of local business people, and depending on whether you vote in a 5 or 7 member board. And then the SID, if it was stood up within the bid, would have to be the DOT by the statute. At least that's my understanding of the statute. And so you have to, I guess one way to help Joe, he explained it really well. One thing I would say, like, one way to think about this is always go back to the purpose of what we're doing. Purpose for like the special improvement district request is like a single purpose. What is the single purpose? We need utilities to this location. And we want to share in the repayment of how much it costs to get utilities to this location. Single purpose, definite, linear, that will get paid off and it will go away sort of issue. BID or a metropolitan district are completely different because they have ongoing needs depending on what focus of determination is. A metropolitan district, for example, by Title 32, you have two or more services. And I would say the metropolitan districts are very administratively heavy burdens on towns if there's not independent, somebody to do it because you're providing a service ongoing, right? Or actually you're providing more than one, so there's two allowable, it has to be 2 plus of the allowable services within the Title 32. SIDs are really easy to swallow because it's like, there is a set goal. As Joe pointed out, there's a set dollar amount that they're gonna pay back and do the assessment, and you just, once you get it in there, you're done. The trick is often on the back end, which is town enforcement. What if somebody's just like, I'm not gonna pay that?
Yeah.
Which, it's, there is a way that the enforcement's easy, and so to speak, because it's undone to the assessor, but it's still not like exactly, that's the only really problem with it, but that's the problem with everything, right? What if somebody puts paying? So anyway, I would look at it as a purpose-driven analysis. That makes sense. That'll help wrap your mind around what we're talking about. And so when we get into a discussion about SID, like you can put a whole bunch of stuff out of your mind and focus on like the easy parts.
And for SIDS, the only people voting on the district are the property owners who will be affected by it, correct?
And
It's or residents. It's kind of weird that BIDs and SIDs have that both if you're a resident and registered to vote in Colorado, which is weird because I guess, for a BID, how many people are living at a commercially assessed address, but they're both very similar in their qualifications for eligible electors. But yes, it is within the district.
And Joe, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I just got myself super confused talking about all the different ones. Isn't SID assessment only?
Yes.
So we don't even have to talk about elections and Tabor and all that when we talk about SIDs. So that helps too.
Well, usually the assessments are repaid by debt. The debt does require.
Bonded. But the bond but it's not levy assessments, it's bond.
Apparently from the research I did a long time ago, I tried to find this, but the because they're not considered enterprise, it's not considered a business, a government business per Tabor. Special assessments are not. It would be a debt. It would not be. They would be subject to the multi-fiscal year.
Your debt for Tabor purposes, I'm talking about like as far as like tax assessment. It's not like a mill levy taxes. It's not mill levy. It's an actual assessment. And yeah, I'll clarify when we get to it.
So
But
there's no election for SIDS?
so there is,
Yeah.
but it's not like a mill levy tax assessment. It's a bond. It's issued from debt bond. It's a different mechanism. It's a different.
But does it still hold that the property owner will have to be a resident of Silverton?
Oh, yeah. All
Okay.
that, and it would be just the
No,
like. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I was gonna say, they don't have to be a resident of Silverton, but they have to be a registered voter in Colorado. So they don't have to be a San Juan County voter. They have to be a state of Colorado voter, right?
But they have to be like what you would term a resident, because by default, like for the SID example, if there's like a group of 10 people. Then those 10 people, and that's the contiguous boundary of where they're asking the SID to be, those are the 10 voters.
Yeah.
Right.
Slightly different than what you guys.
Yeah, it's like for the purpose of the special district. That's what that's like qualifies them. They're a Colorado resident and they own property that is within the border of the proposed map of the special district.
Right, but they'd still have to be a registered voter in Colorado. Someone could be a landowner in that district, but not a registered voter in Colorado, and that would exclude them from voting in this special district, correct?
That's.
Registered to vote in Colorado and a resident or a property owner or their spouse or civil union partner, or registered to vote in Colorado that was appointed by the non-property or the non-person.
Right.
Think about this too, I mean, if you think about if you go back to the purpose analysis, one way to wrap your head around this is like, what we don't want a bunch of people who live here that wanna like do some improvement to be affected by somebody who's just like, I own that property there, I'm not paying, I don't care if there's a road there, cause I'm not building for 20 years, screw you. So you can, part of the deal isn't just, part of the, why this is can or cannot be a good tool depending on which what side you're on. Meaning like if you're the out-of-state person that doesn't want to pay a $500 a month assessment to pay out utility because you're not moving there, you don't want to. This is that like trigger that forces the hand of those kind of like, hey, if you can get enough petitioners together and the town approves it, and the district court does the order, and if you can do the vote, then those other people are SOL and they just got to start paying. So that's kind of like it's a mechanism, which I look at as like a locals mechanism to force the hand sometimes of like people who wouldn't otherwise want to build, it's not their timing, because you're never gonna get, like in a BID especially, but in an SAD, you're never gonna get like the people who are like, yeah, sure, let's all get together and sign an agreement, we'll all give the perfect amount of money to each other, and it's all this perfect,
Yeah.
everybody's looking out for them.
Yeah.
And they don't wanna agree to pay a bunch of money if they're not gonna build for 20 years, or if they're never gonna build, they're just holding on to it as like a, you know, to qualify debt for like a tax purpose in another state, like who knows why they have it. But you can force their hand by this mechanism, which is one of its pros for locals who wanna start their own special district.
But if they choose not to pay, you put a lien on the property. In the meantime, when the monthly payment comes due, the town has to ante up and cover that payment, is that correct?
Well, yeah, now you're talking about like enforcement mechanisms. We can lien property, I don't think SIDs allow like legal term condemnation of property, but we can lien it because it is done through the assessors. And so that gives us a quick enforcement mechanism, so we wouldn't have to file like a typical like lien, we could file like a tax lien like you would on like any other recognized requirement, like if somebody just quit paying their property taxes, the county can come in and just take that property and sell it, yeah. I mean, it's not that simple, but yes.
Yeah, but the town have to cover that payment in the meantime.
Well, yes and no, I mean, typically the payment will have been covered by, and SIDs, again, this is SID only. Typically that will have been, like, we'll have issued bonds against it. And so we would collect it through enforcement, we wouldn't like have to generally pay out like a general fund to cover the cost, it will have been already financed through the bond at the outset. We would have to recover our money before the SID was fully paid, but we would do that through lien. So we're not talking about, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is, and this is, you know, this is kind of across the board, the reason this works mostly is because if it does fall apart, you're not like pulling money out of your general fund to cover it. Does that make sense? It's already been financed either through bonds or other means. Again, SID, we're talking bonds, we're talking assessments. It will have been funded. We're not coming to the board to say, hey, we need $500 because Joe Bob at, you know, unit number 8 didn't pay his assessment, we got to cover it. Like it's already covered. They're just paying back a thing, and then we lien the property. And then we just have to effectuate liens before we close out the bond and the debt, which means like, once all assessments are paid and it's all paid back, then it kind of, there's a, you know, dissolution process, but we don't personally cover it like through the town general funds or anything like that.
How long are these obligations? Are they like 5 years or like in the 30-year range?
Depends on the
Yeah,
proposal.
I guess, is there like a typical?
I mean,
I know it's like all specific, I know, I'm just,
so here, look at it this way, let's take $100,000 debt, just for fun.
yeah,
And put a bunch of zeros behind it. If you're in a BID, commercial debt is 29%, and they have a mill levy, and if you do a mill levy at 29%, it's like one whatever, you know, you're talking like significant payment. So at the same, and then a residential let's do a comparable resident at 7.2%. Well, I'm just rounding, roughly 1/4, right? 7 times 4 is 28, 7.2 is roughly 29% versus the 7%. You're gonna, on the same amount of debt, which you're hardly ever gonna have the same amount of debt, because business costs way more, but let's just pretend you did. A BID would pay you off 4 times faster than an SID.
Yeah.
But typically BIDs are astronomically higher than SIDs as far as like your initial capital investment.
Right.
So it really, again, gotta stovepipe it. We're
Yeah.
talking SIDs, we're talking BIDs, we're talking metros, which will never go away unless the services have to go away. So, you know, in an SID situation with a singular purpose, you set the amount and then you pay towards that amount. You already have projected exactly how long it's gonna take to pay off that based on the assessment and how much originally was, you know, ordered as, you know, for lack of a better term, like the capital payoff amount.
I think,
And you do that by project projection.
yeah, I guess I'm asking for like an SID, because like theoretically that would be in, I guess not the petition, but like the next step of being able to set those terms.
So once we have a projection of project projected cost, and once that's set, then you can work backwards, because there's what they call, well, what do they call, Joe? Something, there's mill levy caps, and what's the other cap called? There's assessment caps. And so once you have the final project number, there's a cap. It's like, I don't know the number. It's like, what's some random number, like 15.5% or something.
35 or something, yeah.
Yeah, it's like some random number. Again, that's why you have statutes, because you can't memorize all this stuff, but once you have your project, and again, Joe, tell me if I'm wrong, but you work backwards from your project amount, and what you ask for the special improvement district owes $32 million or whatever it is, okay? We'll just say 100,000. The max that you can assess is this percent. That percent is based on either, it depends on how it's structured, but it's either based on like the value of the property, the home, whatever, they pay like a certain, they can only like you max cap. You cap it out at like whatever that is, 15.5% of their 1/10 portion of a 10-person special district for that project value. So you wait until you get the project value, then you work backwards based on the caps. But they, you know, if an improvement district comes in and petitions a certain way, you don't have to pay at the cap. You pay half the cap. It would just take twice as long to pay off. So it depends.
All depends.
All depends.
Well, and it strikes me as a way to it protects the individual, so you're not assessing a yearly payment or a monthly payment that is like exorbitantly high that someone couldn't pay, but you're also making it feasible to over time pay off this infrastructure cost. Like it's a financing mechanism for projects that individual people couldn't typically finance.
And that makes sense, and I think it also helped clarify like a process question I had too, of like, there's kind of like the basic like petition, and then you have a hearing, and then, but it's like, what's that in between where like, I don't know, that we might need a little more information or work out a few more details, because that seems.
So the process is petition, the town resolves, it gets sent to election if there's gonna be a assessment, which that's how it works, and then there's a district court order. And then it starts.
Okay, I get like the basic process, so I was like,
But there's like within those 4 steps that I just described.
Yeah.
There's probably, you know, 5 sub-steps.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the sub steps I'm curious about.
Yeah, when does like the project valuation and like debt issue happen? Like, could there ever be a situation where, you know, there's like more debt is taken on than is required to finance a project, or vice versa?
Yeah.
Like, or the project costs more than the debt is issued.
Sure there is.
Especially if you wait till.
Nobody's ever like, you can't, even with a projected project, you don't swag a project, but that's.
Right.
So
So
it's kind of shared, you share the hurt with the other people you're in it with, or, you know, that's part of the deal. Like, that's why, like Joe said at the beginning, once you set that $1, you can change it, but you have to go back to an election. Typically,
so there is another election.
Well, if they want, like, so as an example, if you're an SID, you mess up or you under project by a gross amount and you wanna deal with it, like. the same people who voted to initiate are probably the same people who are gonna say, hey, we need to do this, we need to reset, like, we need to up our value. Because we don't wanna, we have to pay this and we need to spread it out amongst ourselves, because that's the purpose of it, to make it fair that everybody pays their just amount for the benefit of the project. And then you would just reset it for another election, and those same people vote, and they vote to increase it. And then, if they get too much money, obviously, then we are holding the bonds, and so that would be returned to whoever financed it. They don't get to just, if they grossly overestimate, they don't just get to be like, oh, sorry, town, like, we're gonna keep your money. It's all, and that's all done through the assessment and administration of the, the district. And again, I'm only talking about SID right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, Dana, I feel like you keep wanting to talk, and we just keep.
No, it's great. I was gonna ask if Joe had any other comments on that, how he's seeing it play out with special, it seems like we're talking about special improvement districts in particular, so I didn't know if Joe had any other examples to share of how it plays out when it's more or less than you originally thought.
Well, I worked with the state revolving fund on those improvement districts, and they would just take back the principal, basically. So it's always better to ask for more than the upper end of the contingency, basically. But everything else was spot on.
One question I had was kind of around the project management piece of projects like this for a SID, and then I have another question about the bids. But so we've talked kind of through the process piece, right? The petition, we've talked a bit through the process and the financing, but there's this whole part in the middle where a really big infrastructure project happens. And I suspect, like my colleagues, what we sort of care about is what kind of burden is that on the town staff and the board versus on these special improvement district folks. Like, are they managing the project management, contractor selection, putting it in project management day to day, month to month? Or is that something town staff and the town board oversees?
I would assume for an SID it would be the town.
Yeah. And what was interesting to me when you said the bid part, the bid can kind of pay for or finance like the management or operations to an extent. So can the SID include money in its request for a project manager?
Well, by that I meant that an SID, yeah, I mean, that would be built into the overall project cost, I think is what you're asking.
Yeah, like I would assume, of course, the town has responsibility to make sure that whatever gets put in meets our design standards and specifications. That's our job. But as far as the day-to-day, like I think about this with a developer. Let's say this SID is sort of like the developer. Maybe that's not the right way to think about it, so correct me if I'm wrong. But when we work with a developer, we kind of have agreements on these are the standards you're going to meet. This is how you put streets in our town. These are the specs you have to follow. But then the developer really oversees their contractors day to day, week to week, making sure the work gets done and it's on time and on budget. And so the town just is checking in, making sure that's to our specs. So with the SID, does the town have to act as that project manager, or can the, champions of the SID, do they get to put as part of the project cost, the project management, as if they are the developers?
Well, the SID folks, before they go to the election, would need to have a good idea of the costs. And from my understanding, they would want to have it bid out already.
Yeah. But then sort of like that overseeing, I just know how these projects goes. You remodel anything, you renovate anything, there's someone regularly on site making sure that things are moving forward. not just from the public works perspective of like, does this meet our standards, but from the like, this is our project that's happening. And so that's the piece that I think I personally, I suspect my colleagues would have the questions about is like, okay, is it town staff that's serving as that infrastructure project management, you know, like we did when we built an EC Park or something like that? Or is it entities of the special improvement district that someone is doing that as part of the project management costs and the overall project cost?
Well, if I put on my water district board hat on, I think it would be the responsibility of the town.
So,
But
Okay.
this is not something I've been involved with. I mean, I've been involved with governance and financing,
Yeah, not the
the
project
public works
management
side of it.
piece. Yeah, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, and maybe this will come up more when we're talking about a specific project later, but that's just the thing that comes to my mind is, or if we talk about the business improvement district, right? If it was not the town board as the board, then who's managing that project? If it's sidewalks, lights, and some, you know, infrastructure on the road, who's hiring that contractor? Who's making sure it's the right specs? Who's reviewing what lighting is getting put in, et cetera, et cetera? Is it the town or is it the board? And maybe the board is the town, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the zoning and planning specifications, they would have to be, it would be the town who was inspecting them.
yeah,
But I guess if it was independent as an elected board, I don't know how big this is.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I guess they
Dana?
could. I mean, I'm guessing there would be, you know, there's no perfect like dividing line. Like, sorry, SID, thanks for petitioning. You don't need to be involved with finding good project managers. But I assume the town's going to be doing a lot of that. Is my
Great, thanks. Yeah, Gloria, what were you gonna say?
Dana, we do have, Jeff is here and wanted to speak to that, if you can be, general.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Can you all hear Jeff online?
Well, my name is Jeff Diener. I'm one of the proponents of this SID. And I'm just gonna speak in generalities because I've studied all of the detail of this and how it works. But Dana, to your question, basically this SID, it would be a town project. And town, I believe, is required to put out the RFPs for the contractor. So the town would technically be hiring the contractor. Town staff would oversee it, just like, you know, the public works director of the town would oversee any construction project that you hire out for. So yeah, town staff would be supervising that. Whether there's a public works director or you use, was it SGM out of Glenwood? Or you bring on someone, an engineer from Durango to come up and make site visits every 2 weeks. That goes into the cost line items for the town. So like any town staff costs, that all gets rolled into the full project, the total budget of the full project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for clarifying. That's helpful. I know, Jim, you wanted to add something. You had a question?
Thank you. I think that this conversation leads me to my biggest question is knowing where we are as a town board, town staff, knowing where we are with regards to staff time and capacity issues. Do we have capacity for this?
Well, and again, we're talking generally right now.
Well, I'm speaking very generally.
yeah, you have a good point, Jim, because essentially.
But I think that's probably the question we need to ask ourselves. Because we want to do this. I think clearly it sounds good. We want to see this happen. But do we have the capacity to get this done?
But I guess theoretically, it sounds like we could add, it's almost like a, I don't know, fee or charge or whatever, of like, if we needed additional capacity, that would be within the financing options for that project.
You could even hire.
And that's where I was gonna go with this.
Yeah, you could hire a part-time employee, you can hire a private contractor, you can do whatever you want. And that will drive that project cost, like what we talked about.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, things like residential project, there's still tap fees and all those normal things, so like. If this was like a major development, maybe this, a one-time thing to try to develop, 100 houses might not be a thing. You have to look at it on like an individual project sort of thing, so. You can put that in however you want, tap fees will take care of themselves, that's what happens, you guys understand what that means, whatever the project looks like. If you're running line for, a mile out of town, obviously that triggers other things because you might be going into unincorporated areas, but that aside. If it's within the town to do it, then you can hire someone to do it if you want, and put it in the project cost, and then the residents, if they vote to do it, have to pay you back. So yes, it is a town project, but no, you don't have to eat normal. You could, I mean, I've seen towns that like an urban renewal authority, environment where they'll hire a third party as like a project manager, and they roll that cost into the payoff, or into, the financing, and that's part of it. So you're not stuck with what they give you if you go forward with a SID or another government, or another one of these Title 32 things. You have control. Trustee Harper to do it how you want to do it. It's a great question. Inevitably, of course, there are administrative issues that will come up, and the town has to have yet another project in Public Works eyes on to make sure the holes are getting dug at below the frost line, all that stuff, sure. But you also you can contract that out or do a part-time employee. I mean, you can do whatever you want. It's your project.
Yeah.
You're just creating a district to get, so that you get paid back for doing it.
Jim, did you have more there? More questions?
No, that answers the crux of it. Knowing where this conversation was going to go, and knowing that the entity can bring on its own staff with direction from town. But knowing also that the initial setup of this will be by town staff. Just spitballing of what we actually have for resources.
So we could also do like, is there like an administrative fee that could also be charged too? So there's like hiring a person to project manage, and then there's like kind of the administrative work that'll have to happen.
And the administrative fees are, they're subject to scrutiny insofar that they have to be related. They have to be like, you have to show that it's more than what would be normally required of a staff member, and it has to be related specifically to this project, and it has to be, for example, like more than what, like basically like bonus hours, I don't know, like something like that, where you're like, okay, well, this person has to work an extra 20 hours a week, they're gonna get paid time and a half. That would be something we wouldn't normally do, but for this project, so we're gonna bill 20 hours of our public works director's time and a half, and add that to it, sure. You can do that. But you just have to be careful, like when I hear administrators, I just kind of get a little. Cause that's where people like try to play with taxes and pretend like, oh, it's really a fee, but we just have to be careful how we do it. And there are certain requirements that we get into when we get into specifics. But yes, you can include administrative fees and other costs associated with the project into the dollar amount. And so far, that it's like the daily job of a public works director to check a tap. No, that's included in the tap fee, but insofar the public works director is possibly like giving an extra 10 hours a week that needs bonus time and they're used to do it. Maybe, sure. But again, that's one of like 100 examples.
Yeah.
So Joe, I have a question for you on the bids, and kind of the pros and cons of a bid versus a SID sort of, right? Like I think of all these things as tools that we as elected officials can use to help certain projects happen or help certain residents, businesses, areas do the things that they'd like to see happen. And so thinking about how small we are and thinking about like the idea of a Blair Street Improvement District, like we said, we're talking about the main things that are wanted there are like sidewalks, lighting, better grading and accessibility. And the area could contain commercial and residential. And so my question would be if kind of back to Clayton's point about purpose-driven districts, sort of, why wouldn't we think about something like a SID for a project like that as opposed to a bid? Like, what's the benefit of the bid that would bring to a small community and business district like we would have here in Silverton?
Oh, well, Joe, I know you have something for this, but the quick answer to that one, Mayor Cranker, is a bid allows you to, do tax assessments. And so the benefit of a bid is that you can put a tax levy onto like a commercial building that's paying 29.2%, whatever it is, taxes. And you can get immediately from their, on their commercial tax assessment, you start getting paid back at the bid. In a SID, you cannot get paid real estate tax. Or sales tax for that matter, like you could in a bid. Bid, I think you can do real estate and sales tax as a repayment method, so you can really generate revenue response easier. And so the different structures have different payback options. And so the benefit for like not doing a SID is that you can only do assessments, and those assessments aren't based on necessarily commercial value. They're based on a certain cap, and it's going to take you a long time on a big bid project to get paid back if you try to structure it like a SID, because you just don't have that payback, that payoff power that you do with a bid.
So with a bid, you could add to the sales tax that's collected in that district just for that. And with a bid, you could add to the commercial property tax that's already paid just for that area. And then that would start getting paid annually or when those taxes are collected.
Yeah, so bids you can do property tax and assessments, and you can't do sales tax. But you can, again, remember, you can do the SID within a bid, and so eventually, if you really wanted to, you can get all revenue sources within a bid, because bids allow SIDs. Other structures don't allow, like you can't do a bid within a SID.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right,
So
but you can just SID within a bid.
Again, imagine the most complicated Venn diagram possible.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, bids are just more versatile. Maybe you could do a general improvement district, but are the residents going to want to pay that extra property tax? I mean, it's part of the whole pay your own way type of thing. I think that makes the BID attractive. But everything your attorney said is are great points.
Okay, a couple other questions I had is I think I'm talking about the SID in particular, there's no real limit to the number of property owners who can be involved, right? Like there's not a minimum or necessarily a maximum, but you have to have some sort of geographic area, but the boundary doesn't have to be contiguous. So no minimum, no maximum, but a defined area.
Right. I mean, with the 50% property ownership kind of dictating how big it can be.
Right. But you could have 50% of 8 people, or 50% of 4 people, or 50% of 100 people.
1 million people. Yep.
Yeah.
Bids are by acreage, I think. Typically bids are by ownership acreage.
Okay, yep.
Bids are
And
by
then
people.
Okay, so my question with the financing piece, and Joe, since that's more of what you're familiar with, this is helpful to get your clarification. So let's say with the SID, you say this project is $1 million. This is the assessment on all these various property owners. They have a vote, it passes. This is the assessment on all these property owners that gets filed with the assessor. And then the town gets a loan through a bank to finance this project, and the town would issue bonds, or the town would just, I think that's what Ron's point was getting to earlier, and so maybe we all need a bit more clarification on municipal financing. Of kind of like, when we think about financing, we think about that monthly payment coming due. And so I think that's why Ron was asking, like, well, if someone defaults on their assessment, they don't pay it, then how does the financing work? So does the town take a loan and then issues bonds so we have that cash available in that instance? Or do we not take a loan and we issue bonds for the whole value and that's the lending mechanism? Does my question make sense?
Usually, yeah, usually from my experience, it was an entire year was collected in advance.
Through issuing bonds.
Uh, the revenue received from the county.
Okay,
They
so
would
the
get,
county is collecting, so the assessed amount would be a year, we're not collecting monthly payments, we're collecting kind of a larger amount in advance.
right. As far as I understand, it's once a year.
Yeah. But then again, I think to Ron's point, if that next year, the project wouldn't be paid off necessarily in a year, right? Like these payments for
No,
these entities, these property owners would be spread out over time. So the county is collecting it once a year. And then if one person is in default at that yearly mark, again, Clayton, I think you were trying to clarify this, but how does this work for the town to have the cash on hand to meet the debt obligation if we had to go through some sort of tax lien process with the county? Like, I'm still trying to understand the financing of how we have the money in the bank.
It's
And
a
maybe
bond,
Gloria, as our financial director, has more insight on how this works, because I know you've researched this a lot.
bond finance, it's simple bond finance.
Yeah, so we do need to take out, so this is very similar to the USDA project that we just did, and we had to engage with a bond attorney for that. So that if anything was in default, we were covered. And so that would
Okay.
be this instance where it would be, we would engage with a bond attorney, take out a bond, and then it would be covered if anything, if any payments that weren't coming to us were in default.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
The bonds are like, I'm gonna reference one of my favorite movies, Dumb and Dumber. They're like IOUs, okay? So they're as good as money. And we just, the local government backs them, and then you don't, like I said, you don't pay out of general funds, you have your bond. So you IOU the financing, they give you the money. Typically, obviously, you have to have money to start a project. You finance however much the project is gonna cost, the initial whatever percentage comes out, starts the project, and then they immediately starts getting paid back by the assessment. And it becomes this kind of symbiotic relationship where assessment pays for our ongoing fees, but we're bonded so that if somebody doesn't pay, we have that we can go after them through our enforcement mechanisms before it becomes due at the end of the project, basically. So like we're covered until everything is paid, or we foreclose, or whatever we do to like to lien that property, get paid back what we are owed to somebody that's paying. But they are assessments to the assessor's office, which means it is a very simple transaction as lien processes go to get the assessor's lien versus like having to set our own lien like we have talked about and not done for the purpose of, because it is wildly complicated outside of that assessor's lien process. And so we're as covered as we can be. We can't say there's no risk, but the bonding financial mechanism is such that we're never gonna be paying shortfalls out of the general fund or anything like that.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Okay, last question, and I'll let colleagues jump in for the last 11 minutes. But Joe, can you clarify, does the special district dissolve when the project is complete or when the project has been completely paid in full?
I didn't see a dissolution process for SIDs. But I
Okay,
think a lot of municipalities do fill in the blank by formally dissolving once the district once the loan has been completely repaid.
okay, yep, thanks. All right, we have about 10 more minutes, so I want.
Oh, you're unmuted.
Sorry, 10 more minutes. I want to make sure we get to everybody's questions while we have Joe and Clayton with us on this topic.
Thanks. My general questions have been answered. I think I have more specific questions relating to the agenda topic that we'll get onto later, but one of the more general questions.
How many special improvement districts have you worked with?
Local improvement districts are what I'm most familiar with. What's the county mechanism? I'd say 5 or 6.
Do you feel real comfortable with that if we come to you with questions and advice?
Questions I can research, advice. I can't give you legal advice. But yeah, anytime, please feel free to email me or call me.
Okay, thanks.
Oh,
And I think
muted.
my
Sorry.
email address was on the last page of that presentation.
Thanks, Joe. Carl, did you have any lingering questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, Lindsay?
Right now.
Jim?
Joe, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Joe.
Very informative.
Thank you.
And I haven't heard Tyler so far, but is Tyler there?
No, he's not.
Okay, so no questions for Tyler. Let me look at my list one more time. I think the questions were answered. I think for me with the business improvement district, thinking about our specific application of it potentially, I'm just like, I see the benefit of the flexibility of it, like you were talking about, Clayton. And at the same time, I just wonder, do we have enough commercial properties in that district to make standing up something like this worthwhile for them, right? Like enough commercial properties that could make this a worthwhile thing for themselves. So that's an outstanding question, but I don't know if anybody here can have the answer to that. So
One thing I've seen, VIPs are driven by the business owners, typically like the commercial entities themselves. There are other, for example, the Urban Renewal Authority is driven mostly by the government that goes through like a process, and you can kind of access the same thing, right? You're like, wait, we have this area that we recognize as blighted and it's a business district, and if we could create this Urban Renewal Authority, we could generate funding to bring in these businesses, et cetera. Whereas a VIP is more like if you were going to develop a large commercial area and you needed capital infrastructure and marketing and all the stuff that goes into a major commercial development. And so you typically see those not in municipalities the size of Silverton.
yeah,
Where we're dealing with we're dealing with more like small business owners. You know, the adage mom and pop shop is a real thing. Like we're dealing with people who own their own business, who are created on their own. they have no need to generate a large commercial development with a bunch of other commercial developers. You know, if a Target was coming in and you guys were gonna have a racetrack with a Target and like, you know, a small, you know, Six Flags or something like that, like that's when you're seeing stuff like that more often. We'll be, I mean, honestly, like bids is maybe something that at least for now, we can mentally put on the back burner. I don't think it's happening. There's not, now that's not to say we can't use Title 32 to do something very similar, and I would point towards like the Urban Renewal Authority or something like that, but I don't see bid as like something that's like gonna happen, honestly. It's possible, sure, like there's like a small little, somebody buys a piece of commercial real estate and they wanna develop multi-businesses and there's a bunch of owners who get together and wanna do it, sure. It's just not typically what I've never done bid, I don't know if Joe has, I mean, they're from where I've seen bids, they're large commercial developments in larger, much larger areas.
Great, thanks. I just want to check in with the board. I know we have a couple folks there. We have Mike Ariak and then Jeff Diener. Obviously, we'll be talking about the special improvement district specifically later, but if it's okay with the board, I thought it might be worthwhile to let either Mike or Jeff ask any questions to Joe while he's here, if that was useful, as they've kind of listened to this conversation. Is the board okay with that?
Yeah, and Bill also had his hand raised on Zoom, so I don't know if it was a question or comment, but just acknowledging that.
Great. I think this is a work session, so I'm very happy for those people who are particularly related to this discussion, if they have any questions before we close.
I feel fine. Yeah.
Great.
Yes, okay, well.
I mean, just
Bill.
Or if you guys want.
Bill, we're going
Ask
to, or allow you to talk real quick. You should be able to unmute yourself and you have the floor. And we cannot hear anything if you want to talk to you. We can still not hear anything yet. We're gonna pause you for a minute. Go back to the in-person and then we'll come right back to you.
Thanks, Gloria. Yeah, so Jeff or Mike in person? Questions for Joe?
Well, I don't have any specific questions. I just wanted to thank Joe for coming and helping everyone understand what seems to be a pretty convoluted process. So thanks, Joe. I mean, I did email with Joe on my own months ago, and he was helpful kind of with some of my earlier questions. But yeah, we've been speaking with another attorney as well, who's helped a lot. But yeah, so thanks, Joe, for coming.
Sure. Problem.
Thanks, Jeff. Local government at work. Mike, did you have any questions or comments?
Maybe later.
Bill, do you want to try again and unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead, Bill.
Yep.
Okay, I was not able to attend at the beginning of this meeting, so I'm not quite sure what I missed. I came in at about the 30-minute mark. But in a situation like the Blair Street Improvement District, where there would be a blend of grant funding and then additional funding raised through an improvement district, how does that process work when it's a blended source of funding?
Most grants programs will have a match requirement, so the blending is pretty normal, I assume. The one thing to be careful there is state grants can cause Tabor issues, but I won't get too deep into that.
Can we come back to you if we have specific questions on that financing, or who should we talk to then?
Patrick Rodinelli is your grant person, the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
But usually, I mean, I would assume you'd be okay with your with whatever questions with your ballot language, you would be able to, ask multiple questions, ability to retain and spend, yada, yada.
Like if a total project cost was X and grant funding for the project was a portion of that, you could potentially use a SID or a bid to finance the additional portion that you would need.
They have been, yeah, improvement districts have been used, in combination with grants, on the ones I worked on.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you just finance the delta.
Right.
Obviously, when you apply for a grant, that it has to be for the improvement district, but you can't like get a grant to do a project necessarily, and then because it takes a while to start an improvement district. So, and it's typically like we talked about, typically we're talking about some sort of revenue either by tax or assessment, and so we have to wait for a November or odd May regular election, so you have to make sure that your timing is correct. And the best way to do that is just say at the outset that you want a grant for like the Blair Street Renewal Authority project or something like that, and be all tied together from the beginning. And grants like typically, grants are like that because they know that you have a solid funding mechanism to do. So they do work very well together.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. I am conscious of time. I know we have a couple more things we need to get to today. So if there aren't any more pressing comments, Joe, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate the support, the overviews. This is really helpful for boards like ours. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's a pleasure.
Thanks. So for those in the audience, those online, the board is now going to go into executive session from 6:30 to 7:37. So if you want to join the regular meeting, you have public comment, you care about something on the agenda, you will need to leave the chamber and sign off of Zoom, and then you can come back online at 7 and we'll start our regular meeting. So Gloria, if it's okay with you, I'm just gonna give a few minutes as everybody kind of transitions. Does that make sense?
Then I'm gonna remind the board here that we do have salads for you all in the back there, so if you guys wanna grab your salads.
My fault.
Yeah, it's all your call.
I didn't want to keep that.
Thanks, Joe. You're welcome to have your evening back. We appreciate
All
it.
right, have a good night.
Yeah.
So Gloria, if we reconvene at 6:37,
Sounds good.
okay. You good with that, Jim? Great. I'll just wait a minute for Jim to join. Can you let me know who's in the room? Is Tyler there and is Anthony there?
Anthony's here, Tyler's not here.
Okay, otherwise all the trustees, Melina and Gloria and Clayton?
Yes,
Thank you.
and if you wanna start your spiel, we can hopefully, oh, he's on, okay. We'll just promote him. So this is a special meeting of the Board of Trustees, it was March 24th and it is 6:38 p.m. And I'll let you take it from here, Dina.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll now entertain a motion to go into executive session.
I'll move.
Second.
All right, roll call, please. Oh, and this is a request to enter executive session in accordance with 24-6-4024A CRS concerning the acquisition of the leased land from the BLM known as the RMPP. We have a movement and a second. Roll call, please, Melina.
Robertson, yes. Trustee Wakefield?
Yes.
Trustee Parker?
Yes.
Trustee Gardner? Yes. Mr. George is absent, Mayor Pro Tem Parker? Mayor Kinder?
Yes. We can give it a minute for Jim. I know he's coming back.
We'll start the process.